Welcome to And Also, Season 2, Episode 7, Because We Checked Before, so we know we're right this time. We are going to be in Exodus 4 tonight because we're looking through the story of Moses. We're actually looking through the entire book of Exodus, but Exodus, at least in the beginning's main character is Moses. So Kirk and I are going to talk about Moses because he takes up a lot of space in the first few chapters of Exodus. So tonight we're going to look at Exodus 4 at least, maybe further.
Wow.
We'll see.
If we can get past this, that'd
We'll
be
see.
very impressive.
Where the subtext under Exodus 4 is Moses given powerful signs.
And bloody feet.
And bloody feet. With that said, we're going to jump in. So Kirk has some questions to open us up.
Oh, man. This is a weird chapter.
And here, just a little bit of insider information. You know it's going to be a good conversation with Kirk when Kirk says, I have some questions. What follows is always one of the most interesting conversations you'll have all week. So, that said...
Wow.
Yes.
Way to set up the letdown.
Yes.
That's
yes.
fantastic.
I'm right in there.
So, chapter 4, verse 1. We pick up with Moses still whining from chapter 3. So, what if they don't believe me?
Is that how you imagine he sounds?
He was a palace nerd, right? And he got booted.
What if they don't?
What if they don't believe me? If they don't listen to me? But he hasn't hit the Charlton Heston voice yet, right? So it's still early.
He still has time,
right? He's just wandering around with sheep at this point. He's got time on his hands. Maybe he learned some good tunes to whistle, but he hasn't gotten his voice yet. And this frustrates God later. But at this moment, you can hear God's eyes roll, and he says, "What have you got in your hand?" Right? And
you know how great it is that you just, when you add accents to the scripture, like how much it just changes the whole tone?
Well, I mean, if you just read it blank, right? Okay, but this is a conversation, and God gets annoyed. And God gets annoyed because when we get down to, where is it here? Oh, yeah. Was it verse? Where are we? Oh, verse 24. When we get down to verse 24, I just love the way this is worded in this version, right? So this is NIV that I'm reading. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. Like, he sends him on a mission and has really amped him up, given him tools, given him things to do, signs and wonders, and then you're just like, you know what? Oh, no.
I've gotten way too ahead of myself on this.
Yeah, this is not going to work out. And, he's the Almighty, so you could just pull the plug from wherever, but he decides to show up at the hotel. I just love that. It's very personal. But while doing that, his wife took a flint knife, which, what? How, did she have it handy? Did she have to make it? That's amazing. So took a flint knife, and this whole next scenario...
Do we need to issue a trigger warning for this?
Yeah, so I have. This is where one of my questions comes in. Because
excellent.
You're in a hotel.
Yeah.
And God shows up to strangle you.
Yes.
And your wife knows that the answer is
cutting off your son's foreskin.
Quickly circumcising your son and dabbing your feet with the skin. What? Why? Why is that a thing?
Is that the question? That's just.
Why was that the answer to what was happening? What the heck? I don't understand that at all. Why was that the answer to God's come to smite Moses in his sleep? Maybe in the shower. I don't know where Moses was at the hotel, but at the lodging place. They're at Airbnb. Along the way, and suddenly God's like, no, this is not working out at all.
This is not what I was hoping for,
yeah.
Moses.
You got to be kidding me. So it's an awkward workplace scenario. The boss the boss is shutting us down now.
Moses is not getting Employee of the Month.
No, which is sad because he's the only employee.
That well, I labeled in Exodus 2. I labeled him the failed rescuer, and I didn't, and because 3 times he tries, the third time he kind of does, but then he gets left behind. But as it goes on, you realize just like how much how much God must be involved in this situation because of how much of a failed rescuer Moses really is, and how reluctant he is, and how and this is actually encouraging to me. So I'm like, if God's using Moses, all right, maybe I've got a shot. Not at being Moses, but you know what I mean, like just being used of God. But like just the fact that Moses is so inept in a lot of ways, yet he's got this.
See, I wonder about that a lot, right? So he's raised in the palace, but also schooled by his mom a little bit. Has to be, otherwise he doesn't know who his people are, right? But that being said, he must have encountered resistance and had some sort of inferiority complex, and it was really harped upon to the point where he feels completely inadequate
Mm.
being in front of any. He doesn't have the leadership skills that he imagines he should at his age, right?
Yeah.
So the opening scenes where, hey guys, stop fighting. Oops, I killed a guy. Which that whole scenario doesn't make sense to me at all. But he somehow got the upper hand and killed the guy with the whip who was beating somebody, and buried the body, and then ran away. Right, so he runs off and meets up with the daughters of Jethro, which just sounds like.
You just can't get that out of your head, can
There's
you?
banjo music there, right?
Ding, ding, ding,
Yeah,
ding,
right.
ding.
That whole this whole portion of the Bible is goofy to me. But this is a key player, and right, this man is heralded as founder, right, and savior of getting people out of
The
Egypt,
whole nation, I know.
right, a whole
Yeah.
nation. And later on, God says, "I will, wipe out everybody and form a new nation through you." Even though 2 seconds ago he's
Trying to kill him.
He's like, "This is not working." Right. So that's something interesting to me in Exodus.
Mm.
Genesis, right? Welcome to the world. Hope you like it. Just don't eat from this tree.
Yeah.
Everything else is all yours. Enjoy. And how about this tree? Not this tree. Right? And then people. And then too many people. And they get kind of crazy. You know what? I'll just wash this whole place and start over. I'm just going to start over, flood. Boom. Noah and kids. Noah and kids fill the world again. Because we don't take that long, apparently, to fill the world. And then now here we are with the Israelites, right? So children of Israel. His wife, Moses' wife, is from Midian, who's a cousin, right, step cousin of through Abraham, and that's amazing, right? So now you have children of Abraham. There's children of Abraham all over the place. God said, "I will make your kids like the sand of the sea." Sure thing, boss. I got a job to do. Right, so off he goes. There's kids everywhere, right, and kids of kids of kids. So that is amazing. But when he is running away from Egypt, because he's not facing up to what he did, when he meets up with the 2 guys arguing the next day and says, "Brothers, please," and then they already know.
Right.
He's like, "Oops." So maybe he has bad vision and didn't realize everyone was watching.
Right in the public space.
Yeah, right. And like,
What?
Huh? How did they know? I don't know. I don't know how it went down, but somehow word traveled quick. And then when he gets to this well where he meets the daughters of Jethro, that they at the well the shepherds come up and he shoos them away so that the girls can get their water for their animals, which is courteous. But it wasn't like, you guys go find another well. It was, or wait your turn. It was like, hang on, I got this. That was it. Yeah.
Shoot. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at this fantastic wig. Can't you tell I'm from Egypt? Right? So, well, all right. I can't imagine walking around and all that. But in any case, and plus it must have been such a long walk going like this. But
For the benefit of those not watching, Kirk doing the Bengals "Walk Like an Egyptian" song.
it's a very long walk across the desert in that position. But
If we didn't have to worry about copyright issues, I could edit in the song afterwards. But
can you even imagine? This is amazing. Take that. That's why God was able to get his people to outrun them in the desert
because they were walking like an
walking
Egyptian.
like that, and it takes so long. But in any case, no, I'm being silly, but it's just strange. This whole wind up for chapter 4. So what have you got in your hand? A staff? Right.
I got a stick
Right,
in my
right.
hand.
So this is the man who will be your leader later, but is like, is this a trick question? A staff? Yes. And then throw it on the ground. Okay. So that part is funny enough. And also moments before that, when we are at the burning bush, right, he first gets to the burning bush.
Yeah.
The translation of where God shouts Moses from a burning bush, and Moses says, "Here I am," is almost like shouting "Present," right? At the time, I just love that. So you hear your name coming from a burning bush, and then your response is, "Here I am."
I'm over here.
Huh?
So do you think Moses is? Do you think he's? And I used the word inept before. Do you think he's inept, or do you think and then you called him a palace nerd, which I think is wonderful, or do you think he's inept, inexperienced, palace nerd, inexperienced, or do you think he's just in shock, like where there's just like he doesn't know which way is up because he's all of a sudden being called to do these things that, like he wasn't even thinking that was ever going to be a thing.
I would actually imagine that he'd been kind of picked on for a long time, right? You're not going to be king.
Yeah, right.
You're the adopted son of the princess, but you're not going to be king.
Right.
You're not going to be prince.
You're always on the outside, even
You are
though
on
you're
the outside,
yeah.
and so I'm sure there was a lot of snubbing,
Yeah.
right? And belittling, and that is evident in his behavior. I think here, the why me, like how could it be me? I'm no good, right? That's reflected
Yeah.
in
you're right.
how he's responding, right? Which is sad. It's
Yeah.
sad, right? But you can see it.
Well, and I think even before you leave that point, because I think it's important, is so even when he approaches those two guys to try and mediate that you mentioned before, he, even they reject him. He's one of them, but he gets rejected by them. Who put you in charge of who made you judge over us? Like
You have no authority, and
you have
everyone
you have
knows it.
Right, yeah.
Right.
So not only is he not an Egyptian, he's not a Hebrew, so he's in this space.
He's just a figurehead.
Right, and so he tries to find his way by doing these things, and does it poorly. Leaves and gets kicked out to Midian, and then you see this, I guess you're right, this outpouring where he's trying to make sense of himself in the middle of being called to do these things, and even as you're reading it, like just having a really hard time doing it. He's like, here I am, like I'm, or even when it says that when he saw the burning bush and said he turned aside to see. I think that's a really interesting thing, that it's not like, wouldn't that be the most obvious thing in the desert, like, or I mean in the mountains? He's like eventually you come upon this thing and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I need to go. But it's like he's doing this thing, and then Moses, and he turns aside to see. Like that's when it dawns on him.
I just like that, it's a burning bush, but the thing that makes him want to turn aside isn't that it's a burning bush. You're out there among bushes, I guess, and short grass. There's sheep eating this, sheep and goats. But the fact that it's not being consumed is the part that makes him fascinated. So are bushes burning regularly on their own?
That's not the issue.
Right? Because
The issue is
how come that one's not burning up? What an amazing wood that is. Maybe I should check that out. What his thought process was. Because the fact that it's burning isn't what's noted. It's the fact that it was burning and not being consumed is, wait a minute. That's the part that catches his attention.
That's what we are.
Yeah, I don't know. That fascinates me. The personality of Moses fascinates me.
And then even even the idea of like the Charlton Heston voice, eventually I think when you reflect on Moses, and not you, but like when
The great you.
the great you, the Dasman, when you reflect on Moses, it's usually done from like this leader perspective, where he's leading the people through the desert, he's hitting the stone, he's holding up the staff, all these stories of him. Not that he's always doing great things, because sometimes he fuddles through even as even 20 years in the desert. However,
Grumpy Moses is my favorite.
Grumpy Moses, yeah. Which of the seven dwarfs kind of Moses? But like this Moses is, there's really, and again, this is not a criticism of him. It just gives me a lot of encouragement that he's kind of inept. He's full of shame in a lot of ways. Inept maybe too strong a word.
Yeah, I don't know if
I'd
I'd go with inept so much.
He doesn't know he doesn't know what to do. Like in any situation he's put in, he has no idea what to do.
He's shy to do anything.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because he doesn't feel he's capable.
Yes,
he's been told he's not.
Right.
Is my guess. He's been told he's not.
Yeah. That's probably
good at anything his whole life.
Yeah.
So when you get to this, what if they don't believe me? Right? That's stage. Because clearly he said things that no one believed before and got laughed at. He has feelings about this.
Yeah. This is experiential. Yeah, you're right.
So
and it doesn't matter who's talking to him. So even the God of the universe comes to him, and that doesn't matter. He's still like, well, what if they don't believe me? Even though God's the one telling him to do it.
So I am curious at this moment, right? He's already asked, who is this, right? Here I am.
Back in 3.
Yeah, I am who I am. So God explains, I am who I am, the Popeye answer, and now, does Moses know who that is? I hope so. I hope his mom might have told the story.
Well,
it says his dad knew, right?
Yeah, I'm the God of your. I'm not looking at it right now, but I think it says I'm the God of your father and your forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But there's not. And then he says, I am who I am. I think he says, who should I tell sent me?
Right.
And then I am who I am. But he's only given information about who he is based on his descendants, his father and his Hebrew descendants.
His Hebrew line.
Right.
So he's none of the gods of Egypt.
Right.
That has been cleared.
Right.
I am from these, right? I'm the God that has been with your ancestors all along.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Very, yeah.
He has seen the gods of Egypt worshipped until this point, right? His whole life.
Right, yeah.
And so now a flaming bush is talking to him.
Oh.
And this is weird. But he accepts it as such and is now having a discussion. And that is fascinating, right? He's had to remove his shoes, which the holy ground part, we were talking about this after service, like what's the perimeter distance of holy ground?
Does it become non-holy ground?
Yeah, like where does that run out? Like how many feet is the perimeter of holy ground? Like 10 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet,
Sheep, you can stay there.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
on non-holy
You sheep
ground.
stay over there. Yeah.
I'm on holy ground.
But are the sheep holy? Are they okay? Because they've never committed sin. So I don't know. Like what?
Let's go. The sheep are.
And then do shoes represent sin? Why are the shoes? But I have many questions. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is
Maybe feet touching the bare earth. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, I guess. Why this? It's hot here, but
Yeah.
let me step on this barefoot. Great.
Well, it's interesting that because I've not thought about. So I've thought about the idea of Egypt's gods. I've not thought about the fact that Moses would have been very familiar with Egyptian gods.
He's getting dragged along to all the ceremonies.
He would have known them all. He would have known everything. Well, he would have known a lot. So then he meets the god of his descendants, and he does accept it. I mean, obviously he doesn't know what's going on, and he's not sure of himself, but he accepts what's happening to him, because what's and the reason why the gods of Egypt are so important is that when we read this story, we don't we're not immersed in that world, right? So
We're familiar with the National Geographic cover of Tutankhamun.
Right, but we're not thinking about the cosmic understanding
Right.
the cosmology that they would have had. They would have, and so for them, they couldn't have thought of a world that so we understand, and we believe as Christians that there is a world that that is spiritual, of course, but we also know a lot of people who don't believe that at all, right? So, in not first century, we're way before that. In the ancient Near East, they wouldn't have even thought that there would not be any gods. Like that just wouldn't even been in their minds.
Right.
It would have been which god does which thing. So that's their whole mindset would have been which god does which thing. And we know that because the plagues are all about the God of
Specifying each god.
right. Oh, and that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is stronger and better than the other gods of the. But for Moses, I mean, this has got to be. I've just not thought of it in terms of his own, not Egyptian faith, but his own Egyptian understanding of the gods. Like this has got to be disorienting for that reason alone. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's not like when he meets the God of his ancestors that he's like, oh, this is this
Because
is
I'm sure he heard legend of and
right. He would
talk of, but there weren't synagogues yet, right? That's not
No,
a thing.
right.
There's no temple yet.
No temple.
There's what worshipped or did they understand or have at that point?
And was it underground because they did?
Sacrificial something, perhaps, because when we get to Midian, Jethro's a priest.
That's true. Yeah.
So there's some sort of understanding of what should happen along some line, and I'm curious what that is. Like, what do they interpret it as? The sacrifice of sheep or goat, right? Because that's what Abraham does when
Right. That's true.
when Isaac is released, right? That's
Yeah.
the sacrifice and worship
And the sacrifice in Genesis 12 with the covenant.
with the covenant,
So
right?
sacrifice was understood.
Right. So is that the worship that they understand? And but then they are shouting into space. They feel no response for many generations, right? Since Joseph.
Since Joseph, yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, the understanding that how Joseph got to here and why all of us are here in Egypt had to have been passed down.
Right.
But how to worship, what to do, that maybe that's still there. Maybe there's something there.
There's I don't know. The only thing that I think of is then Passover. So we have the sacrifice that we have the lamb that's sacrificed.
Blood on the doors.
Blood on the doors. So either that's a brand new thing which it wouldn't have been brand new, but it might have been a renewed thing that they were unfamiliar with, but that God through Moses instructed them to do, or God instructed them to do that because it would have been very familiar to them, except for the blood on the doorpost.
I'm thinking that's a marker, right? That the whole scenario is a marker for the angel of death to pass over.
Right.
Hence the name. But
Right.
For the angel of death to pass over, the angel of death is looking at each door.
Right.
There's a mark. There's not.
Right.
So I think that's unusual, because I think that would be strange, not something they would have done regularly.
Yeah, I think the ritual of the blood over the doorpost that's new because then God sets it up and says, okay, now remember, this is the Passover,
This
now.
meal eaten in haste.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a ritual that they pass. So, but whether or not the sacrifice would have been new, or whether they would have been like, no, this we're used to. We're just not used to doing the marking.
Yeah, right. So yeah. By the way, love that Passover meal is spoken of as eaten in haste, and anyone who has ever attended a Seder meal will tell you it's hours long
You're right.
before you get to the food.
It's you gird your loins and you grab and go. That's the
Right?
whole.
That's what it said.
It does.
Roast the lamb, get your herbs out of here, right? So
Right.
no. This meal goes on. We read for hours. Check for Elijah. Oh boy. But back to this.
So what? So what do we do with Moses at this point? So he's an uncertain guy that's being placed in the situation that he doesn't seem to know what to do, or he's very uncertain about what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
What do we make of him by chapter 4? And what do we make of him? And what is God doing?
Well, God made him throw his staff on the ground and turn it into a snake,
Yes.
which that's kind of funny. So like you can pick anything. Throw a stick on the ground, poof, it's a snake. And I love that that's his selection of things to accomplish. It's simple, right? Because he sees that it turns into a snake and just runs immediately. So which you would have thought along the way, since these are iconic in a lot of Egyptian art, that he would have seen snakes on a regular basis. The I don't know. He knows that this one's bad and takes off. And then God says, go back and grab it by the tail. Right. Let me do that.
That is a funny detail, and Moses ran from it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like what?
I was holding this 2 seconds ago.
Moses doesn't get an inch. He's like,
Yeah.
he makes a snake and runs away.
So God already knows Moses is afraid of snakes, turns his stick into a snake, which that's just mean and funny. And then the next moment, what does he do? Stick your hand in your cloak. Ah, leprosy. Ta-ta. Oh, put it back. Okay. So I just love that moment. Like, this is what you want me to show? Look at this. This is how you know it's the God of the universe. Ha ha! Leprosy. Right?
Leprosy.
Yeah. What? I just think those are funny. And then later on, God's like, well, if they don't believe in the snake and they don't believe in the leprosy, then tell them this, right? But those are your lead-offs, snake and leprosy.
Well, it's interesting about this, and then about this whole thing is that God's method for doing this is really quite strange, to be honest. That he does that he says, okay, try the snake thing. And if that doesn't work, try the leprosy thing.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, now we got some other things for you to do.
Water on the ground.
Water on the ground.
It'll turn into blood.
And for a while, as he's doing that, the Egyptian magicians can copy it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, and then it gets to the point where in the plagues where they can't copy it. But it's an interesting progression that God uses instead of just being like, you know what, you know what, I'm just going to go deal with this. Instead of saying, oh, we'll send Moses. Well, we're really going to send Aaron and Moses, and we're going to give them all these like strange things to do that Pharaoh's not going to listen to.
I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. But go do this.
But go do it anyway.
Right. So that's like got to be like, oh, great.
So what's the meaning behind any of it? That if the only thing that's going to move Pharaoh's heart. Now, I think it's fair to be said that Pharaoh's heart was already hardened, like he was already, and when, especially as it moves on and on, where it says, it does say in the first couple of plagues that Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, which that's a hard pill to swallow, to be honest. But it is fair to say that Pharaoh wasn't moving that direction. He wasn't moving toward letting them go anyway.
Right.
But still, nonetheless, why any of it? If at the end of the day, Pharaoh wasn't going to let it go until the killing of the firstborn sons.
That whole scenario is really worth some deeper analysis. Like some rabbis must have written about why.
I'm sure, yeah.
Right, because you go from Joseph, right, in one end of the story, to here we are at Moses' point, and we're making bricks. Right, so hooray, family, sorry, family, right? So we're making bricks, and it's miserable, and there's gnashing of teeth, and everyone is saying, God help us. And God help us ends with killing of the firstborn.
Right.
That seems severe. I mean, on the flip side of that, Pharaoh had done that, and that's why Moses was in the basket in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
So it's reciprocity, I suppose, just to balance it out.
Justice and it's a
and
I think
heavy though.
And I think there is something, like there's a coming from a mindset where we live in a democratic society, where there's and we've had decades and centuries of a democratic society, and while we understand the use and misuse of power definitively, because people use and misuse power, it's not the same understanding of power and conquest that they would have had in the ancient Near East. And so I don't have a great answer, because I think it's okay to admit that there's parts of the Old Testament that are very uncomfortable, as you read them, when you're like, God, and I think it's disingenuous to not bring them up and say, let's just talk about the nice stuff, but then the hard things.
No, there's a lot of weird stuff here.
Because there are cultural issues that are worthwhile uncovering, to say that, okay, that's not the way, and I'm not saying that the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. That's a silly
I
argument.
am who I am.
Right.
Right.
Perpetual. It's the same God, but it is a different culture. So God is like, it is amazing to see how God, throughout the cultures of the Old Testament and the cultures of the New Testament, respond within the culture that He's given. And so, so there is something to be said about the culture of the Pharaoh, where Pharaoh was God. I mean, Pharaoh was the human representation of God. So the only thing that he would listen to was, he would only listen to anything that was God-like. Right, he's not gonna listen to anything less than God, because he's a representation of God. He's the in fact, when Pharaoh dies and is, I don't know what happens after, what they believed happened after they died, but they do believe the pharaohs would become gods. So
it was the passing through the underworld. And having your heart weighed and all that.
Yeah, but I think for Pharaoh, they became divine, and there was a divinity within them in their understanding during their time on earth. So there's a power thing going on there, where even Moses is like, why would Pharaoh even listen to me? Well, he needs the power of God in order to do that, otherwise Pharaoh's going to. So there's a sense of like, Pharaoh's only going to listen to God-like power. So God has to respond in kind in order for Pharaoh to even hear. It still doesn't satisfy fully some of the things that happen along the way.
Yeah.
I think you're right. There is this, and this is, again, I think we've talked about this a lot as we've gone through some passages, but there's a real depth to Scripture that we're talking about a couple layers deep, when realistically there's about 10 more layers that we can't uncover because we just don't have the background for it.
Right.
But it's a worthwhile endeavor. So that doesn't lead us to a nice resolve on Exodus 4, but it does move us along the way into trying to understand Moses's lack of experience. Is that?
I just what was it, verse 18, 19? Where are we here? 10, verse 10. Where? And the way he is saying this, now you have to read it this way.
Oh, I can't wait.
Right. Pardon your servant, Lord. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. Right? So it's immediately go to the Eeyore voice.
I'm slow of speech and tongue.
Right.
Wait.
Yeah.
Now that's forever in my head. Just
You're
like
welcome.
That.
Yeah. But so Moses had to write this down, right?
Yeah.
I love it. This is what he remembers saying. This is what I told God. God told me these things, and I told him this.
Slow speech and tongue.
Yeah, exactly. Pardon your servant. And then God's response, because God's annoyance level is beautiful in this. Like he's like, buddy, come on, look, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight? Right? Isn't it not I? No, go. I'll help you speak. Whatever. Let's go. Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. And you're talking to the Almighty God, who's like, you're literally talking to a bush on fire.
And then he even says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses.
Yeah.
God is like, all right, like come on.
What about your brother? Right? I just like that he narrows it down to the Levite.
Yeah.
I'm thinking there are more than one Levite at that point in history, seeing as that's a tribe. But Aaron the Levite. So maybe there's only one Aaron in the group. But I just like Aaron the Levite. Your brother, Aaron the Levite. Isn't he Moses the Levite? I mean,
You'd think
right?
so, right?
I know he can speak well, unlike you. He's already on his way to meet you. He'll be glad to see you. Now, I like that we start off with that sentence,
Yeah.
followed by, and then in the hotel he's going to kill him.
God's that time to mull it over, and he's like, "Oh, this is a bad idea."
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you, but I don't know. So it's just that combination of things is funny. Like, what did God actually try to kill Moses, or was his wife seeing things in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of weird.
There is. I will say one thing, and we'll, for time's sake, I think we're rounding out the margins of our time here for this podcast. But I will say, we started with the God wanting to kill Moses, and we'll end with God wanting to kill Moses. Poor Moses. I will say what's interesting, and this is, when you get to this point where it's later on, where it says God spoke to Moses as a friend, like as as a brother speaks
I mean,
to a
he
friend.
shows up at the Transfiguration, so
Well, that's
everything's okay.
So there's this strange depth of relationship.
Ooh, that's wild. That's Moses' only time entering Israel.
Oh yeah.
Whoa!
Save that for a
never thought about that before.
Let's
sorry. Go back to what you're
Let's
saying.
mark out that for an addition. That's awesome.
Sorry.
On that note, let's just end it right there.
Yeah. Wow. Whoa. That just hit me.
But just that concept that like there's this back and forth and all these emotions being run through Moses and God. It's a very if you mentioned Joseph, so I was just thinking about Joseph. If you compared Joseph's relationship with God and then Moses' relationship with God,
Distinctly different.
it's crazy different because you've got Joseph, whose relationship with God is he trusts God, and he
implicitly,
and he says, well, I don't have the interpretation, but God does. But the relationship between Joseph and God is nothing like the relationship between Moses and God. So at one point Moses is uncertain or excited, and God's angry and
please send
empowering.
someone else.
Yeah, it's this like very close-knit relationship that includes all these very real emotions. I mean, up to the point that God wants to kill Moses because he's just frustrated. So I like that.
Fascinates me, like that conversation. Like people wonder, does God hear me? To the point where people are like, yes, and send someone else.
I'm trying here. Well, on that note, again, we are working our way through the book of Exodus, so we will come back to Moses, our encouraging and reluctant friend, and keep talking about his interaction. The next couple weeks are on the plague and the Passover, so
fun stuff.
That'll bring up some nice lighthearted conversation. But until that point, thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
It was fun. It's always fun to poke fun at biblical characters and give them voices that I never knew they had.
Well, you have to read it like it's written. If you slow speech.
Slow speech and word.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll see you next time.
Next time.